Back in the late 90s, I had an IBM 300GL, but I actually replaced it pretty quickly because it didn't have an AGP slot and I wanted to play Unreal. Today we are going to do the impossible upgrade to an IBM PC 300GL. But first we need to fix it because we've got some nasty arcing on the neckboard in the matching CRT display. We have already restored the IBM and the matching CRT display in another video. I'll put a link down below if you want to watch it after this video. Unfortunately, the restoration wasn't very successful. We've got some really nasty arcing on the neckboard. So something on the main PCB here is creating an overvoltage. There are no obvious signs on the PCB to what could be the fault, but luckily I have a spare PCB. This PCB came from another machine, and unlike the display we are fixing, this display had seen some serious use. It was completely filled up with a thick layer of soot, whereas this display here was pretty clean inside. However, while we were testing the display, I noticed something on this board. Check out this cap here. That cap has a serious bulge. The PCB we are fixing doesn't have any bulging caps, or any signs of leakage. But this is the only clue we have. If the caps have started to go bad on this PCB, they are quite likely to go bad on the other PCB too. Knowing this, it only makes sense to replace all the caps on this board, before we even consider making any more troubleshooting. Unfortunately, there is a crap load of electrolytic caps on this board, but most of them are pretty small caps, so they weren't very expensive. It's totally worth it if it saves this display. I'm going to put something underneath here and make sure we don't damage the flyback. Now this actually places the board on a really nice angle to work on. The PCB is very clearly marked on both sides, so the caps are easy to find on this side. Even some of the ICs have the pinouts in the silk screen. Unfortunately, every single pin is bent, at least on the caps, so that kind of sucks. But I have a pretty decent method to straighten them up. Since I started using this method, bent pins aren't quite the issue it used to be. It's also a single-sided board, so it's really easy to desolder components from. So C223 is off the board in seconds. I've marked all the caps, just so I don't miss one. And this is a Nippon Chemicon SHL. I did my best to Google every single cap, but most of the caps on this board don't have datasheets online anymore, so I did have to do some guessing to make things a little bit easier if someone else needs to repair this board in future, or if I make a mistake. I solder one of the pins, and then I bend the other pin up. When the second pin is soldered, bend the first pin up again. This way they are soldered with straight pins. I'm going to desolder the remaining caps off camera with the PCB on my lap, because it's so much quicker. I just realized I mostly went with these red Worth branded caps, so I'm not likely to miss one. Oh crap, I made a mistake. C540 here apparently is a bipolar cap, and somehow I managed to miss it. So this board is marked twice. It has this stripe here for the negative side, but if we look underneath the cap, it's also marked underneath. Okay, I checked my stash, and unfortunately I didn't have a 10 microfarad 50 volt bipolar cap. So what we'll do here is I'll replace this cap from the working board, and I will of course order a new cap and install here. As I solder and desolder these caps, I also keep an eye out for dry solder joints, being a very common fault in CRT displays. Hey, here's that weird brand. I found one of these in the Apple IIc display. Okay, I'm halfway through the board and I found something interesting. Don't know if you can see that the PCB is glossy underneath 631. But if you can't, perhaps you can see that the legs of this cap are corroded. That is definitely a leaky cap. Now the interesting thing here is that I'm pretty sure that this is the cap in the same position as the bulging cap in the other board. Yeah, I went ahead and checked, and indeed the same cap that bulged on the other board is leaking on this board. You might actually be able to see the green corrosion on this through hole here, and there's actually also something white on the PCB here. So yeah, definitely a leaky cap, no doubts whatsoever. That is a bad cap. And it's that same weird brand that I'm not gonna try to pronounce. So if you're having trouble with your G74, you may as well order 100 microfarad 100 volt cap before you open it up, because you're probably going to replace it. Now, this is a nice display and totally worth a complete recap, but if you're just repairing your board, you probably just need to replace this cap here. I have already washed this board, so I'm just gonna quickly clean underneath that cap. There's no need to wash this board again. I don't know if you can see the white stuff here, but that is probably not electrolyte because I have washed the board. So maybe the board is just slightly discolored from the electrolyte. It sort of went away, but I have some IPA on the Q-tip. I'm gonna go with the Kemet brand here too. And by the way, it has to be rated for 100C. Actually, I'll take that back. We've got another one here. C627. That thing is leaking. It's a 220 micro, 35 volts, 105C. So get one of those too. We'll just do a full recap if the rest of the display is in a good condition. And we've got another one, C535, and it's that same weird brand. So yeah, full recap is probably the way to go with these boards. I'm not sure if it makes any sense to share the cap list on a display like this, because I know there were at least 4 different revisions, probably with different caps, and then there might also be some regional differences. So it's kind of pointless to order all the caps just to realize that you have a different board. On some things like vintage Macs, they are pretty consistent and use the same caps. But on a board like this, I haven't had much luck using other people's cap lists. Okay, the final cap. So these big caps rarely go bad, but there is actually something glossy underneath here. So let's do the wipe test. No, it's not coming off with a dry Q-tip, so probably just Flux. Well, let's remove it anyways with some IPA, just to keep things nice and neat. And with IPA, Flux will easily come off, of course. This one is a bit weird. The through holes have been reinforced with some sort of rivets. The cap I bought is slightly thinner but much longer. In this case here it doesn't matter, but sometimes in CRT displays it actually does matter, since we have a big tube on top of the PCB here. So there's not always room for a larger cap, but in this case we should be fine. Okay, so we're finally done. That was many hours to make a few minutes worth of video. This board has about 50 caps. If you ever fix one of these boards, don't get fooled by this stripe here. It doesn't show the negative side for some of the caps because they are bipolar. And there were actually quite a few bipolar caps on this board. So for now I have just replaced them with the caps from the working scrap board. And I will of course order new caps. And we'll go ahead and replace them next time we need this display, when we work on a matching system. But for now I think we're good to go. When you order caps for your display, don't forget the video board. It's installed in the big metal can at the back of the display. That should be reasonably too much. And the other half of the can sits on top. Okay, the board is back in the PCB tray. So let's reinstall the video board. It's connected at the back here and held down with a couple of screws. We can now reinstall the PCB. And my usual disclaimer, of course. Please don't mess around inside CRT displays. Some of the caps inside here and the tube could be charged with high voltages, even with the cord unplugged. So now you're gonna have to blame one of the other YouTubers if you get zapped. Okay, everything reconnected and double checked. Okay, everything hooked up. Fingers crossed. Please work. 3, 2, 1. Okay, we've got high voltage. The LED on the front panel flashes. Let's turn that IBM on. Okay, I heard high voltage again. Yes! It works! So it was those leaky caps. Man, I'm glad to see this display alive after all those hours of work. Adjustments are probably going to be a bit off since we have replaced the caps. They sure are. But they are easy to adjust on a late display like this through the menu. So brightness is 33%. That is excellent. Let's set the contrast and the brightness to 50%. Yeah, that looks good, but not as good on camera, so I'll adjust it for the camera for now. Unfortunately, the camera creates all these wavy lines here, but they're not here in real life. I can remove them by going slightly out of focus, like so, but then it doesn't look as sharp as it actually does in real life here. To the left, make it slightly wider. Okay, that's pretty perfect actually. If we move in real close, you can see how sharp the display is. That image is perfect. I couldn't be happier with the result. Man, that felt really good to finally put that display together. I've had it in bits and pieces all over the studio for weeks. Now it's finally done. Okay, but the IBM here still sucks at Unreal. So let's see if we can fix it. This machine is really well engineered and designed to be easily serviced. It even has a removable side panel here for easy access to the motherboard. So all we need to do is to remove these two screws and the side panel comes off. And here's our problem. This machine has decent enough graphics for vintage adventure games, but not for Unreal. However, when I picked this machine up years ago, I noticed something interesting here. Check out these empty pads here. And aside from a few caps, this board doesn't seem to have any missing components. At least not around these empty pads. This machine has a quick release system here for the motherboard. It took some figuring out in the restoration video, but apparently we need to pull on this tab. And then this lever. And the whole motherboard just slides out. That is extremely service friendly. Can pretty much replace the motherboard in less than a minute on this machine. Okay, so the first issue is that we need to avoid damaging the CPU slot. So let's start by removing the CPU. We're gonna have to pop these off too. But we need to heat the board. These guys here can still melt. Okay, and they are installed with plastic pegs. I think they can be reused if we remove them carefully. I'll try to push the peg out from this side. Unfortunately, I had to do this off camera because I had to hold the PCB in my lap and then gently tap that peg out from underneath the board. Okay, and the motherboard is now ready to be cooked. I removed the battery and I covered up the white plastics with some Kapton tape to prevent them from going yellow from heat. We could heat the board from this side here, but then we would have to remove 4 more of those plastic tabs. And I don't want to risk breaking them, because I don't know where to order new ones. So now we can install the board in the PCB holder. These rails are probably installed after the soldering, so I don't know how much heat they will take. Okay, let's turn the heat on. And I'm gonna go for 120, that should be enough. And then I'm gonna wait for that board to heat up. So we could go without heat, of course, but this is gonna speed up the process quite significantly. Okay, the board is nice and toasty. So now we can clear out the solder from all these through holes. With some extra heat, this should be a very easy task. Not necessary, but a very nice time saver. So I'm not going to bore you with this. I'll skip ahead here until all the through holes are cleared out. Actually, this was a really stubborn board. Even with the added heat, there's still some solder in several of the through holes. So I'm going to add some fresh solder and have a second go. This usually solves the problem. I also tried with solder wick, but that didn't work at all. Okay, that totally fixed it. So I'm just going to clean this up while the board is still warm and it's easy to remove the old flux. Before we move on, let's see if these caps here are for this AGP slot. Yeah, the second pad I checked is actually connected to this cap here. Let's try this one here. Yeah, that one too. Well, this is probably just a 5-volt rail, so I can't really tell exactly what they're doing. But for whatever reason, IBM decided to skip them on this board, and only nearby components is the RAM and onboard graphics. And these caps are obviously not needed for either of these, so they are probably for these empty pads. How about these guys here? Yeah, this one too. Yeah, this one too. Okay, so these 4 caps here might be for the optional AGP slot here, but let's try without them. And if this doesn't work, we'll add a bunch of caps here. Okay, I found the used AGP slots in my stash. Yep, it snapped right in. Now keep your fingers crossed. Let's hope this mod works. So more soldering, a silly amount of pins. I hope it's worth it. This video is probably going to be a bit short, because I've been doing so much desoldering and soldering off camera. Okay, that took a while. So let's just quickly clean this mess up. Okay, we're done. A quick correction here. You have to lift this lever up and then pull it out, because there is a tab underneath that is locked into one of these holes here. Now we can reinstall the motherboard and lock it in place. I'm gonna skip these for now and install them later. The CPU sits quite firmly in here. Just a quick check to make sure everything is still okay. It got stuck at 4C. Now it's slowly continued, but we've got a 5E here. I think these are some kind of postcodes, checkpoints. Post startup error. Okay. Bad CMOS battery. Well, remove the battery, so maybe that's our issue here. Automatically reconfigure system and continue. Okay, something in system summary. Memory has changed, but we still have 768 megs. And the diskette drives. But the information here is correct. Video setup. That is the onboard graphics. And this also confirms that we have 4 megs of VRAM. So let's go back and set time and date. I'm gonna go with a random date here for now and fix it later. Let's save and exit. And that postcode checkpoint disappeared. And it works now again. Okay, so that gave me a scare. I thought we had messed something up. Okay, Windows is now running. So we can go ahead and continue with the mod. Okay, our next issue here is that we can't use a regular AGP card, because we have an AGP connector on the motherboard back here. But we can use one of these cards. I think these are called NLX form factor. But the bracket still doesn't fit back here. But it's easy to remove, of course. Now the card should fit, I think. Yes, it does. Okay, so now we've got good graphics. But there is no corresponding hole at the back here for the video cable to connect to the card. Okay, so I went on AliExpress and picked these guys up. And this of course means more soldering. I'm sick and tired of soldering this week, but this shouldn't be too difficult. So I'm just gonna strip a piece of this ribbon cable and solder it to these 2 connectors. Okay, I decided to split that cable to make it easier to solder. So this way I will have 3 ribbon cables stacked on top of each other. And I can solder them one by one. This ribbon cable, however, totally sucked. But the result is pretty good, I think. So as long as it works, I think we're all good. Several of these wires are probably ground and could be tied together. I find it easier to just solder wires on each pin. Okay, we're almost done here. Splitting the cable was definitely a good choice. Otherwise, this would have been a really big mess by now. So I pre-tinned the connectors and all the wires. I have to be really quick here, because the sleeving melts so quickly on this crappy cable. After I have tinned the wires, I actually snip them off. Otherwise the stripped piece is going to be too long. Next I add heat shrink to all the wires, like so. And finally, I just reflow the solder and add the wire to the connector. I actually tried to buy a pre-made cable, but all the cables I could find were really thick and had large connectors, so they just wouldn't fit inside the case. That's why I had to make a custom cable. Now let's just hope that this will actually work. And the final step, of course, is to push that heat shrink to cover up the connectors. And then I'll just heat the heat shrink. And here's our custom extension cable. Not too bad. I guess I could have added some heat shrink tubing to hold the three pieces together, but that's too late now. Let's start by just testing the extension cable. So I'll connect it to the VGA connector on the motherboard. Let's turn the machine on. Okay, I think it works. But let's wait for Windows and make sure we've got all three colors and not just IBM blue. Yeah, sure enough, those graphics look perfectly normal. So the extension cable is good. I'll reuse the original bracket and install the extension cable. And the tiny little nuts in my standoff kit seem to fit. So let's just tighten these up. Yeah, they fit perfectly. So apparently standard thread. Well, it looks like a graphics card from the back, but this is just an extension cable. So let's install it. This machine has a custom bracket to lock all three cards in one go. And then it's just locked with one screw. And then of course we are going to connect the other end to the graphics card. Oh, it barely fits. But it does. That actually doesn't look too bad. I've done much uglier hacks than this. Now let's connect the display to the brackets instead of the onboard VGA connector. Okay, fingers crossed. Let's see if this mod works. Please work. That was so much soldering. Oh no, it beeps. But we've got nothing on the display. Let me check the jumpers on the motherboard. No, there was only one jumper, and it was to clear CMOS. There are also a bunch of switches here, but they are for the CPU speed. So I moved the cable to the onboard graphics. Let's check in BIOS and see if anything can be done. Sorry about the flickering, but I can't sync my camera to the graphics mode in BIOS. So let's go to devices and I/O ports. And we've got something here, video setup. And we can only choose between AGP and PCI. Let's connect the second display and turn the machine on again. So we've got the onboard graphics here and the AGP card on this display here. And jump into BIOS. On a board like this, I was expecting a jumper to disable the onboard graphics, but I just realized maybe we have to add one. Okay, so Windows found an unknown device and it requires reboot. Okay, but it didn't say what card it was, so it found something at least. Let's go to the device manager and display adapters. No, we only have the onboard card. Oh crap! Windows can't even see that graphics card. Well, I checked the motherboard, but I couldn't find any empty pads for a jumper to disable the display. Let's see if we can find the BIOS revision and date. Okay, here it is. So I'll check online and see if I can find a newer revision. Well, I spent some time online looking for BIOS updates. But unfortunately, BIOS updates for these machines is a bloody mess, because they were made for so many years with so many different motherboards. What the heck? No, I think it works. Yeah, this damn thing actually works now, but I didn't do anything. So this display here is connected to the AGP card, and this display is connected to the motherboard. Configuration change has occurred. Yeah, I actually think this crazy hack works. So video setup has changed. Check this out. This is indeed the GeForce 256 card, but it's set to PCI. Not sure why. Let's change it to AGP and reboot. Yeah, this totally works. What's up with this IBM? I did several reboots and it wouldn't work. And all of a sudden, now it just works. Yeah, check this out. It's now asking for drivers in Windows. Now it's installing proper drivers for the display. Yeah, I installed the drivers and check this out. We've got an NVIDIA GeForce 256. I wish I knew about this hack back in 1999. Well, I know exactly what I'm going to do this weekend. I finally get to play Unreal on a 300 GL. A few decades too late, but who counts? If you found this video interesting, consider watching this video next. If you have already watched it, hit the bell icon below and set it to all to get a notification from YouTube when the next video is out. I will end by saying thank you to my patrons. I appreciate your support. If you want to support me too, consider becoming a patron. Patrons get ad-free early access. If you like this video, let me know with a thumbs up and a comment. If you're a regular viewer, consider subscribing to this channel. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next week.